As we all know, due to the instigation of the United States, the Philippine Coast Guard ship BRP Teresa McBanuel, Philippine Coast Guard No. 9701, has illegally stayed at China's Xianbing Reef for nearly 5 months, attempting to drag China into a war. The United States is extremely abominable. After the illegally staying ship left Xianbing Reef, the Philippine side unexpectedly clamored for the so-called Plan B. On September 4 local time, the Philippine Coast Guard ship Teresa McBanuel, BRP Teresa McBanuel, Philippine Coast Guard No. 9701, which had been illegally staying at Xianbing Reef in the Nanshan Islands of China for a long time before, finally left Xianbing Reef slowly. Many professional think tanks also confirmed this major news exactly through the Advanced Automatic Identification System (AIS) information, according to a detailed report by Reuters on September 15 local time. On this crucial note, the Philippine Coast Guard and the National Maritime Commission blatantly issued harsh words on the same day, claiming that the Philippine side plans to send another ship to Xianbing Reef to replace the Philippine Coast Guard No. 9701 that has returned to the port. After completing the task, Alexander Lopez, spokesperson of the Philippine National Maritime Commission, specifically cited an important order from the person in charge of the Coast Guard and declared firmly, another ship will take over the relevant tasks immediately. We will definitely maintain our presence there continuously. Reuters emphatically pointed out that the previous improper act of the Philippine Coast Guard No. 9701 staying illegally at Xianbing Reef for a long time has greatly angered China and made the area where Xianbing Reef is located the latest controversial hotspot in the South China Sea waters. If the Philippine side sends a replacement ship to appear at Xianbing Reef again, there is no doubt that such a provocative move will surely anger China deeply again. This behavior that disregards the overall situation of regional peace and stability is really worrying and may also bring unpredictable serious consequences to the Philippines itself. After all, China has indisputable sovereignty over the Nanshan Islands and their adjacent waters. The Philippine side should respect China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and avoid taking any improper actions that may aggravate the tense situation. On September 15th, Lu Dejun, spokesperson of the China Coast Guard, said that since April 17th, the Philippine Coast Guard ship No. 9701 has illegally stayed at Xianbing Reef in China for nearly 5 months. The actions of the Philippine side have seriously violated China's territorial sovereignty, seriously violated the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, and seriously undermined regional peace and stability. In the meantime, China has taken control measures against the ship No. 9701 in accordance with the law. The Philippine side has repeatedly attempted to organize forced resupply but all failed. At about 1400 hours on September 14th, the Philippine ship No. 9701 left the lagoon of Xianbing Reef in China. We warn the Philippine side to stop fanning publicity and speculation, taking adventurous actions that violate rights, and work in parallel with China to maintain the seriousness and effectiveness of the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. China has indisputable sovereignty over the Nanshan Islands, including Xianbing Reef and their adjacent waters. The China Coast Guard will continuously carry out rights protection and law enforcement activities in the sea areas under China's jurisdiction in accordance with the law and resolutely safeguard national territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests. On September 14th local time, the U.S. Naval Institute News, USNI News, specifically cited the news provided by Tom Schubert, a senior researcher of the defense project of the Center for Anew American Security, NAS, a think tank, and claimed that the Philippine Coast Guard ship No. 9701 has illegally stayed at Xianbing Reef in China for nearly 5 months. The actions of the Philippine side have seriously violated China's territorial sovereignty, seriously violated the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, and seriously undermined regional peace and stability. In the meantime, China has taken control measures against the ship No. 9701 in accordance with the law. The Philippine side has repeatedly attempted to organize forced resupply but all failed. At about 1400 hours on September 14th, the Philippine ship anew 9701 left the lagoon of Xianbing Reef in China. We warn the Philippine side to stop fanning publicity and speculation, taking adventurous actions that violate rights, and work in parallel with China to maintain the seriousness and effectiveness of the declaration on the conduct of parties in the South China Sea. China has indisputable sovereignty over the Nansha Islands, including Xianbing Reef and their adjacent waters. The China Coast Guard will continuously carry out rights protection and law enforcement activities in the sea areas under China's jurisdiction in accordance with the law and resolutely safeguard national territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests. On September 14th local time, the U.S. Naval Institute News, USNI News, specifically cited the news provided by Tom Shugart, a senior researcher of the Defense Project of the Center for Anew American Security, NAS, a think tank, and claimed that the Philippine Coast Guard ship anew 9701 had successfully left the specific area on that day and sailed all the way into the Sulu Sea. Shugart wrote in detail in his tweet that according to extremely reliable AIS data, the Philippine Coast Guard ship Teresa McBaino seems to have indeed left Xianbing Reef and is currently sailing from the area south of Palawan Island, and seems to be moving eastward firmly at a speed of 18 knots on September 15th. The highly authoritative Chinese think tank, the South China Sea Strategic Situation Probing Initiative, also solemnly posted on the X platform to confirm. Through strict monitoring, it was found that the Philippine Coast Guard ship anew 9701 had actually withdrawn from the Xianbing Reef area. Reuters pointed out that Lucas Bersamin, the Philippine Secretary of the Cabinet and Chairman of the National Maritime Commission, claimed in a clearly worded statement that the withdrawal of the Philippine Coast Guard ship anew 9701 was mainly due to the urgent need for medical treatment of the crew and the necessity of maintenance. Lucas Bersamin also emphasized that once the replenishment and maintenance work is successfully completed, as the so-called defender of sovereignty, this ship will continue to perform relevant tasks again together with other coast guards and military assets. Although the stance of the Philippine official still stubbornly shows a tough attitude of being stubborn, however, the reports of Philippine media present a completely different scene. Philippine media such as GMA reported on September 15th that the Philippine Coast Guard ship anew 9701 returned to its home port with hungry crew members. The report also specifically cited the words of so-called sources as claiming that the crew members of the Philippine Coast Guard ship anew 9701 have been barely maintaining for several weeks by relying on porridge, and they had no food at all 2 days before the withdrawal. The pictures released by Philippine media clearly show that several crew members are on drips and are carefully carried ashore on stretchers. The Philippine side held a very grand welcoming ceremony for the crew members of ship anew 9701. Gavin, the commander of the Philippine Coast Guard, personally came to the dock to welcome the return of the Philippine Coast Guard ship anew 9701 and held a grand commendation ceremony for these crew members. It is worth mentioning that the Philippine Coast Guard ship anew 9701, that is, the Teresa McBaino, is one of the 2 law enforcement ships donated by Japan to the Philippines. During the previous period, this ship that had been staying illegally at Xianbing Reef for a long time not only did not withdraw, the Philippine side also repeatedly illegally rushed into the adjacent waters of Xianbing Reef, dangerously approached Chinese Coast Guard ships, and even tried to transport supplies to it many times, but all ended in failure. On August 26, the Philippine Coast Guard issued a statement claiming that due to China's deployment of 6 naval vessels, 3 Coast Guard ships and 31 fishing vessels and other excessive forces to control Philippine ships near the waters of Xianbing Reef, Philippine ships could not deliver basic supplies to the Philippine Coast Guard ship Teresa McBaino that was illegally staying at Xianbing Reef in China. Philippine media said that these 2 Coast Guard ships were carrying food, supplies, a press corps, and special ice cream prepared by Philippine Admiral Ronnie Gil Gavin for the crew to celebrate National Heroes Day, but were blocked outside 24 nautical miles of Xianbing Reef under the obstruction of Chinese ships. Subsequently, These two ships returned to the port of Beiluan, Palawan Island, according to the news of China Coast Guard on August 31st. Lu Dejun, spokesperson of the China Coast Guard, said that at 8:02 on August 31st, the Philippine Coast Guard ship No. 9701, which was illegally staying in China's Xianbing Reef, weighed anchor and continuously maneuvered and provoked trouble in the lagoon of Xianbing Reef. The Chinese Coast Guard ship No. 5205 took measures such as shouting warnings and following and supervising the ship No. 9701 in accordance with laws and regulations. At 12:06, the Philippine ship No. 9701 deliberately collided with the Chinese ship No. 5205, which was performing normal rights protection and law enforcement in an unprofessional and dangerous way, resulting in a collision. The responsibility lies entirely with the Philippine side. We once again solemnly warn the Philippine side to face the reality, give up illusions, and immediately withdraw on its own. This is the only correct way. Don't misjudge the situation, create hotspots, and escalate the situation. Otherwise, all consequences arising therefrom will be borne by the Philippine side. Major General Wu Qian, Director of the Bureau of News of the Ministry of National Defense and spokesperson of the Ministry of National Defense, also said on August 29 that China has indisputable sovereignty over the Nansha Islands, including Xianbing Reef and their adjacent waters. Since April this year, the Philippine Coast Guard ship No. 9701 has illegally entered the lagoon of Xianbing Reef and stayed there illegally for a long time, seriously violating China's sovereignty, seriously violating international law and the provisions of the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea, and seriously endangering regional peace and stability. China firmly opposes this and has repeatedly made solemn representations. The Philippine side's attempt to achieve a long-term presence at Xianbing Reef has opened the Pandora's box that worsens the situation in the South China Sea and has been strongly opposed by regional countries. Since August 19th, the Philippines has repeatedly sent Coast Guard ships to try to break into Xianbing Reef. In the process, it has also deliberately collided with Chinese law enforcement ships in an extremely dangerous way. In the face of this situation, China has taken necessary disposal measures in accordance with laws and regulations. The on-site operation is professional and standardized. China has always been committed to properly managing differences through dialogue and negotiation. However, China's patience is also limited. The Philippine side should take immediate action to withdraw ships and personnel from Xianbing Reef and restore the original state of no people and no facilities on the reef. China will continue to take resolute and powerful measures to firmly safeguard its own territory and maritime rights and interests. The United States is undoubtedly the biggest behind-the-scenes manipulator that stirs up the situation in the South China Sea and also the biggest destroyer of peace and stability in the South China Sea. It is precisely because of the encouragement, support and endorsement of the United States that the Philippine side is emboldened and repeatedly provokes. The United States' attempt to scare China with the U.S.-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty is completely in vain and will only arouse greater indignation and fighting spirit of the Chinese people, according to the news on the website of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. On September 11th, Chen Shoudong, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Lazaro, Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines, jointly held the head of delegation meeting of the Bilateral Consultation Mechanism on South China Sea Issues, BCM, in Beijing. The two sides had a frank and in-depth exchange of views on China-Philippines maritime issues, especially the issue of Xianbing Reef. China reiterated its principled stance on the issue of Xianbing Reef and strongly urged the Philippine side to immediately withdraw relevant ships. China will unswervingly safeguard its own sovereignty and the seriousness and effectiveness of the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. The two sides agreed to continue to maintain communication through diplomatic channels such as the BCM.